where do you predict Shedeur and Travis going in the draft?
Top 4.
That's pretty beautiful.
Anywhere from 1 through 4. One of them is going to be 1. The latter one would not go behind 4. Now, all this is subjective because I know where I want them to go. So there's certain cities that ain't going to happen.
Okay, you on point.
It's going to be it's going to be an Eli.
It's going to be an Eli. So we were talking a half hour ago, look at RC's face. We were talking a half hour ago about, Caleb Williams and all this kind of stuff. And let's make it clear, Caleb Williams has not given anyone any impression that he's going to do that in Chicago. But here, RC, I'll start with you, is Deion Sanders saying, no, I'm going to be in control of where my son goes and my other stars on my team. And that's just the way it's going to be. Is that going to work?
Why not? Hey, listen, I talked to Deion on Monday. I asked what he was doing because his phone rang funny, and he was like, well, we had a week off for spring break, so I took the boys to Dominican Republic. That's a different life. That is that Eli Manning sort of life. That is my dad and what my father has accomplished, and the way that his voice carries can put me in different positions. It's the reason Eli Manning got to be a New York Giant. It's the reason Eli Manning is viewed the way he is because of the market that he played in and what he was able to accomplish. But that almost never was. But because of his father, because of his last name, what his brother accomplished, they were able to manipulate the draft. So why shouldn't Deion Sanders be able to do it? Let's even look at this year's draft with Marvin Harrison. His father, who is also a Hall of Famer, said, we are going to prepare for the 2024 season as if we are already a pro. And for all intents and purposes, he's still going to be a top 5 pick. We are going to, in my estimation, see this more and more. But here's the thing that we have to remember. You better be that boy. You better be the one. Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter have to show that beyond the shadow of a doubt, the film says I'm good enough to make these choices and force you into these choices. That's the same thing with Marvin Harrison, and it was with Eli. And so I have zero problem with Deion Sanders saying what he said, and I also believe that other people will listen.
What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, so I thought Travis Hunter and Shedeur would be top 10 picks if they did and or were able to come out this year. I think pretty firmly that they both will be top 5 picks. Here's my pushback a little bit to Deion's plans or theory. 1, it takes 2 to tango. And so while you can believe that, okay, we want him to go to these cities, the cities, 1, have to want those players as well. And then 2, have to be able to go up and get to the spot in the draft that is going to be necessary and be willing to part with the assets to go up there. And that's a lot of moving parts. It was the perfect storm for the Eli and Phillip Rivers situation because the Giants were willing to part with what was necessary to go up and also get back the quarterback that was going to be needed to replace Eli. So it was the perfect storm for that one to work out. That would be my only pushback to Deion. I don't disagree with the talent, and I don't disagree with at least the attempt to go do it. But it's going to take a lot of moving parts matching up perfectly to make sure that both of those happen for each individual player.
That's fair. Again, we keep referencing things I'm old enough to remember. I remember when John Elway didn't want to go play for the Colts in Baltimore, and he forced a trade out of there. So I think these things have happened in the past. Yeah. And look, in an era and a generation now of young athletes who are accustomed to having some degree of ownership over their situation, that was not the case in the past. I don't know that it necessarily exclusively depends upon your father being anything
I
for
think,
this.
To RC's point and the point that Dan is making, the top tier athletes who have Hall of Fame pedigree, yes, they can dictate their situation. I think if the talent dictates, hey, I want to play for these teams, those teams might move heaven and earth for them. But overall, this new generation of quarterbacks, I think NFL personnel execs, GMs, they all have to understand, these kids understand that they have agency. And that is a shift that it's not just the most talented. I think in general, these kids understand, hey, you need us. Like the NFL does need us too. And I think that's a seismic shift here. I even think it goes beyond just the draft. Like I talked to a GM during the combine and said, he said, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years we're seeing more kids decide, hey, I'm just showing up to India to do medical. Like, I'm not doing any of the drills. Like, you'll see me on my pro day. Now, Marvin Harrison can say, I'm not doing anything, turn on the tape, I'm him. He's one of one, perhaps. But I think overall, we're going to see kids acting differently because this generation is different, and we all just need to get on board with that.
And finally, you know, Dan, go ahead, RC, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, these kids have a little agency, but these kids also better understand that the NFL has been standing for a long time. Yeah. The NFL has outlived some of the greatest players, not only retiring, but passing on. And so, yeah, like, you got to be one of those ones to make that decision. Like, even with the Caleb Williams and some of the stuff we were hearing, which actually we haven't heard from Caleb Williams personally, there were a ton of people that started to push back on that when we heard things like equity or he might not want to play in Chicago. The perception of the people that were criticizing him or the people that were analyzing some of those things was negative because Caleb Williams doesn't have that sort of pedigree. Caleb Williams won't be spoken for by a Hall of Famer. And so I do believe that you have to be on a level where a team feels like they can't pass on you being something that is monumental, being something that is transcendent. Because if that's not the case, teams will say, it's okay, I'll move on to something that's close or equal that I want in my building more than your personality.
Final word, Dan, go.
Yeah, and RC is spot on. And that's why, again, the Chargers and the Giants made it work with the Eli situation because the Chargers sat there and said, fine, we'll take Phillip Rivers. So there's got to be next year's draft, there's going to have to be a Phillip Rivers in there. And the last thing I'll say is this, RC is spot on. At some point, this is going to happen, I agree, and some young man is going to walk into a situation thinking his doesn't stink, and it's going to turn badly for him. Just because it worked out for Eli doesn't mean it's going to work out for everybody.